Hey, this is John. I'm calling from Indiana.
John from Indiana. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, I just wanted to say, first off, I'm a big fan. I've been listening to you guys for a couple of years now. And I really appreciate listening in on news commentary that doesn't make me feel gaslit. So
doesn't make you feel like what?
Hopeless.
Oh, hopeless. All right. Well, we do our best.
Yeah. But I wanted to call, and I'm trying to word this without being too inflammatory. I wanted to call about Ana Kasparian, because I feel like that is not getting the right kind of attention. And so,
Okay.
and I know you were gone yesterday, Sam.
Yeah, I think.
I think did you see I commented on this yesterday?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
And I know she's a friend of the show, and I know that, her and Emma are personal friends. And so, I don't think that, you need to like completely lambast someone, but I don't know. I felt like, for instance, the clipping of that, with the title that she's not anti-trans was not necessarily the right. To me, it just seemed kind of tone deaf. I guess the problem I had was that like that tweet in and of itself, it wasn't great, but I think the bigger context was the replies. It got very combative and a lot of Nazis popping in, agreeing with her. Ben Shapiro's retweeting her. Carrie Lake popping in saying, hey, a broken clock. And some of the replies from her, I'll be honest, were indistinguishable from something that, J.K. Rowling would say.
But within the context of like her larger commentary on trans people, I don't think that's a fair critique to put her in the same boat as J.K. Rowling. And like, you can have, I think, quibbles with the way the video is titled. I didn't even know that was getting clipped, and I don't have control over any titling. So, but the substance of what I said that's
not anything about any one that's just more of like a critique of like, just show formatting.
Yeah, well, let me since Emma addressed this yesterday, let me comment on it. And I will say this. I mean, in terms of just, and I don't want to spend too much time because this is just sort of a process thing about the titling and this and that. When the way that we do this show is we do the show and then another person clips the show. Now there's on occasion I'll say like, oh, somebody really wanted this phone call or this and that, and I'll send a message. But part of the reason why we do that is because I don't want what we do on the show to be dictated to how I think it's going to do on YouTube. That, to the way that I can insulate the show from like sort of chasing clicks. That's the way I do it. I do think that the guy who clips the show, sometimes like it's his job to sort of get clicks. And so he may do that in different ways. So, but that's aside, that's a second order thing. Here's my feeling. And I will also say, I didn't read into the whole thread of that because I was literally constantly moving yesterday. But look, I don't have any reason to believe, based upon her commentary in the past, that Anna is anti-trans. But tweeting out something like that, in my estimation, is the tweet itself, the act and the tweet in this context, right? Is an anti-trans act. I just think it is. Yeah. Because, and context is everything in this case.
Yeah.
One of the issues I had with Sam Harris back in the aughts was that right in the midst of a debate in this country about torture, he writes up a thing in Huffington Post, which was basically the equivalent of Twitter, maybe bigger than Twitter in terms of like, broadcasting this stuff, a piece that he titled In Defense of Torture. And, even if I thought that his thought experiment and whatnot had like any sort of like substance, which I didn't, But even if I did, to tweet that out in the midst of a debate about torture in this country is clearly a political act in and of itself, and he knows what he's doing there. Now, I don't know if Anna was, sort of how conscious she was of this or what, but in addition to the fact that no one is forcing anybody to accept any type of description of who they are, and I'm sure there are some quarters. I wouldn't even say quarters, 16ths, eighths, whatever it is, where people exclusively use language like birthing people as opposed to women and birthing people. But it really has no impact on her life. And it has a huge impact on the lives of people who are trans. And, look, there are, it's not easy for older people, in my estimation, or people just not used to it, to always remember to have some level of sensitivity to these things. And people should do their best. I mean, I don't have a rule about it on the show, but for me personally, I always attempt to say, if we're talking about abortion laws, I try and say women and people who can get pregnant, as just because it costs me nothing, and it shows respect to people out there, and particularly at a time where there are people who are under assault for being trans. There are families who are under assault for trying to get their kids some type of medical care, in some way, gender affirming care, or to deal with this. It is particularly incumbent upon us to show that level of sensitivity to the people who are impacted and to this moment. And so, I just thought that the tweet itself, and I don't know what her intentions were about it, but the idea that saying, semen providers, in any way, and look, I will say, saying semen providers, I don't think disregards my manhood in some way. I understand that, though, that it's not a perfect analogy, because the fact is that women have been subject to misogyny and to sexism, and men have not. There's a different power dynamic. Nevertheless, I don't think that in any way women are in any way harmed in the sort of like society's consciousness by the use of things like people who can get pregnant.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it right, Sam, and I elaborated on this yesterday. I think it's perfectly valid to say in your personal life, like, I don't want to be referred to in those more clinical kind of stilted, awkward terms that are inclusive language meant to be inclusive, and we're still incorporating it into our language. It's not that many years that we've been using this kind of terminology. I think that's entirely fair. My critique was, well, as a member of the media, you have to understand, and at least this is what I try to bring to it, is that you're not just speaking for yourself, and putting an emphasis on that in this current context is going to lead to larger problems and adding gasoline to a fire that is already raging, as trans erasure is a part of state legislatures across the country. And on the federal level, we're seeing it from Republicans too, and just like general hate crimes towards them. So that was my emphasis, and I understand if you didn't feel it was sufficient, but I'm with Sam on this, and that's my take as well.
And I will say, look, if someone in your personal life, in your private life, is, addressing you in a way that you don't like, you tell them. I don't know that there's anybody on Twitter who has been addressing, her as a potential birth giver.
That's kind of my whole point. Is like it feels like she's shadowboxing against an opponent that doesn't exist.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
No one on the street is calling her that. Nobody, and you go.
Well, if somebody's calling her on the street. Well, that may be the case.
You is saying this.
Somebody's calling her.
Well, yeah, but it's specific legal and medical context. No one is saying, to her, to anyone, hey, there goes a birthing person, unless they're talking about, hey, we're writing a paper or a prescription or some kind of thing about
you don't necessarily
reproduction.
But caller, that could have been a personal instance. You don't know that, and I actually haven't clarified that.
If it is a personal instance,
but that's
you deal with it there.
But that's beside the point. But that's my point, right? If it's a personal instance, we're members of the media, we're representatives of the left. I know that's what TYT is, right? And that's what people associate with them. You have to just be conscious about that. I'm not conflating one's own personal experience, even if it's awkward, with what is generally good for society. So that's my I think that's the kernel of critique there.
Appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right. Now, I'm not going to say we can't take any more calls on that, but we did just dedicate 11 minutes to it. And that's,
I think that's fair.
Friday.
And whatever, I did yesterday, 5-6 minutes yesterday.
Right. Where is Jessica Hyde? I know you guys don't want to keep talking about this, but from the perspective of a child-free gal myself, I thought of Anna's tweet as more of a statement about wanting to be seen as a person rather than an incubator, and I felt I could understand where she was coming from. The language that people use to avoid the word woman can sometimes lean more into the idea of what you can and cannot reproduce. I don't like these attacks on Anna, but I especially don't like it when different groups get into a suffering contest. Yeah, the problem is that in no context other than when it comes to reproductive rights, do you hear people use that kind of language in that situation?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe somebody on the street corner has that conversation, but you see it in reports that are talking about abortion rights. You're seeing it in reports in terms of medical treatments. I mean, this is if what you were saying was actually the case, then that would be a legitimate conversation. But that's not the case. Mm-hmm. It just isn't. It's imaginary.